Shalom and welcome back to God's Story, Our Story, Catholics for Israel's online Bible course. I'm Dr. Andre Villeneuve. This is part 2 of 3 of our study of Israel in the wilderness. Last time we studied the book of Leviticus, or the book of holiness, where God called Israel to be holy just as he is holy. Today we are studying the book of wanderings proper, the book of Numbers, which will take us from Mount Sinai to the edge of the Promised Land. And next time we will study the book of Deuteronomy, the book of renewal, where Moses renews God's covenant with Israel on the plains of Moab just before they enter the Promised Land. If you recall, the entire Torah, or Pentateuch, has something of a chiastic structure. What's a chiastic structure? Well, it's something that goes like this: A, B, C, B, A. As we saw, the story began with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and their expulsion due to their sin, and this is going to lead to slavery in Egypt. The book of Exodus begins with God's deliverance of Israel from Egypt and the beginning of their wanderings from Egypt to Mount Sinai, where God makes a covenant with them, adopting Israel as his chosen people, making them a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Then the book of Leviticus is God calling Israel to respond to their newly found identity as God's people. As I just said, it's God's invitation for Israel to be holy as God is holy. And so in many ways, Leviticus is the heart of the Torah, which crystallizes Israel's call to be holy just as God is holy. Then today, the book of Numbers, we move from Mount Sinai through the wilderness towards the Promised Land, and we're going to see many parallels between Numbers and the book of Exodus, 2 books of wandering, so to speak. And finally, the book of Deuteronomy has a lot of parallels with the book of Genesis, because Deuteronomy, as we said, is Israel's preparation to enter the Promised Land, which is a land flowing with milk and honey, and really a type of return to paradise, where Israel will live in communion with God in a way that's analogous to the way Adam and Eve lived in communion with God in the Garden of Eden. If we look at the outline of our book of Numbers, what does that look like? Well, 3 major parts. First, the first 10 chapters, we see the first generation at Mount Sinai. We see a census of the first generation. This is why the book of Numbers has a bit of a bad rap, because it begins with this long census of many names and counting the various tribes of Israel. And then we see several chapters of setting apart the people. In other words, the people preparing themselves to leave Mount Sinai and begin their journey towards Canaan. And then the departure occurs in chapter 10. Then the middle part of the book is really focused on the wilderness wanderings. These wanderings should not have taken all that long, because Egypt, or Mount Sinai, is not all that far from Canaan, but we're going to see in chapters 11 to 14 the failures of the first generation, and especially the episode of the spies, when the people refused to go and take the land that God was giving them. And that's going to lead to a serious prolongation of their time in the wilderness. So what should have been a short journey turns into 38 and a half years. During this time, God will reveal more laws, and there will be more rebellion of the people, and that's really the center of the book. Then we're going to see the failures of the second generation, who are not going to fare much better than the first. The last third of the book focuses on the second generation of Israelites in the plains of Moab. We're going to see a threat from Moab in the episode of the king Balak and the prophet Balaam of Moab, a census of the second generation, which will be a type of bookend matching the census of the first generation of the beginning, and then a review of the journey and preparation for possession of the land. So that's our roadmap for the book of Numbers. The timeline of the Exodus, a bit of a summary. As you can see, how much time have we spent here in the wilderness? Well, the beginning of the book of Exodus, we cover about 80 years, the first 40 years of Moses growing into adulthood, and then his 40 years in the land of Midian, so that by the time he returns to Egypt, he's already 80 years old. Then we see 50 days going from the Passover to the revelation at Mount Sinai. And then Israel will remain something like 11 months at Mount Sinai, from Exodus 19 through the second half of Exodus, through the entire book of Leviticus, through the first third of the book of Numbers. And by the time we get to Numbers 10, within the space of just a few chapters, well, we have the 3 months that's going to lead to the rebellion at Kadesh Barnea, the episode of the spies. And then from Numbers 15 to 21, just 7 chapters, within a flash, 38 and a half years go by. And that's going to be the main bulk of Israel's times in the wilderness. And then by the time we get to Numbers 22 through the end of the book of Deuteronomy, this covers only 2.5 months, the time that Israel is in the plains of Moab listening to Moses' final speeches to Israel. So much of the book of Numbers, just 7 chapters, but they cover about 38 and a half years. Okay, part 1 of Numbers, the first generation at Mount Sinai, the first 10 chapters. What's going on here? We see a census of the first generation, including a military census, the arrangement of the camp, and then a second census that is focused specifically on the tribe of the Levites, then setting apart the people, which is going to include holiness regulations, dedication of the tabernacle and Levites, celebration of the Passover, the cloud getting ready to depart, to lead the Israelites into the wilderness, and then the silver trumpets marking the departure. So here we go with the census of the first generation. The great medieval Jewish exegete Rashi says that because of God's love for them, he is continually counting them. So lest you be tempted to dismiss this counting of the tribes of the Israelites, the great medieval commentator says that this is because of God's love for them. We begin with a military census, the first chapter, which counts 603,550 men. And so a large group of Israelites. We know that this number is a bit problematic. Many scholars are very skeptical whether this would have been possible, but this is the number that the book of Numbers gives us. And so the 12 tribes, excluding the Levites, add up to this number. Then we are told that the Levites are appointed over the tabernacle for the ministry of the tabernacle. And then chapter 2 focuses on the arrangement of the camp. And we are given 4 formations of 3 tribes each that will surround the tabernacle. So what does the arrangement of the camp look like? Something like this. As you can see, the tabernacle is in the middle. Then we have the Levites immediately surrounding the tabernacle, the 3 clans of Levites, the Kohathites, the Gershonites, and the Merarites, with Moses and Aaron on the eastern side of the tabernacle. Then we have 3 tribes on each side of the tabernacle. And that's how the tribes were positioned in the wilderness. Here's another illustration which gives us the same pattern. The Levites surrounding the tabernacle, and then surrounding them, the 12 tribes of Israel. There's a distinction to be made between priests and Levites. All priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. Recall that the Levites are one of the 12 tribes of Israel, but the priests must be sons or descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother. And so we are introduced to them at the beginning of chapter 3, and then we are told about the duties of the Levites in verses 5 to 13. And the Levites will be indeed the servants of the priests who will assist them in their duties, but the Levites are not allowed to offer sacrifice or actually carry out the ministerial priesthood in the sanctuary. Then we are given this census of the Levites with the families of the 3 clans of the Levites, Gershon, Kohat, and Merari in chapter 3. And we are told that the Levites will redeem the Israelite firstborn. This was already hinted at after the sin of the golden calf in Exodus 32, but here it is clearly spelled out in numerous occasions, such as here in Numbers 3, verses 11 to 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Now behold, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine." So it doesn't explain it here, but combining this verse with Exodus chapter 32, where only the Levites took Moses' side during the time of the apostasy of the golden calf, here we are told that the Levites indeed replaced the firstborn to take on this role of being the priestly tribe. Following this, we have yet another census and the work of active Levites, and these are the ones that are aged from 30 to 50. So here's to clarify again this distinction. As you can see, Gershon, Kohat, and Merari are the three sons of Levi. So all of these on this genealogical tree are Levites. But who are the priests? The descendants of Kohat. We have Amram, and then the son of Amram is Aaron, and the priesthood will only be the descendants of Aaron. So it's a much smaller subset of the Levites who constitute the priestly class. To see how that goes further on in Israelite history, once again, Gershon, Kohat, Merari. Kohat is the father of Amram, the father of Moses and Aaron, and then Aaron will be the father of all the future priests, and the priesthood will go through Eleazar and then Phinehas in the book of Numbers. We will see him in the latter part of the book, and his descendants will lead to the priest Tzadok at the time of David. And from this name, Tzadok, we have the Hebrew term Tzedukim, which is in English Sadducees. So by the time we get to the Gospels, the Sadducees are in fact descendants of Tzadok, who is himself a descendant of Phinehas, Eleazar, and Aaron. We are in chapter 5 of Numbers, and it's time to set apart the people with specific holiness regulations. Recall that Leviticus was the book of holiness, but we are not quite done. There are still some holiness regulations to prepare the people for their departure towards the promised land. The purity of the camp is essential, and this is why those who are leprous and ritually unclean are expelled from the camp, because as we saw in the book of Leviticus, purity is essential in order to enter into God's presence. We are given some laws of restitution for treachery. In other words, if someone unlawfully holds money through loan, theft, overdue wages, or so, he must make a confession and make restitution plus 1/5 in reparation for his treachery. Then we have the strange law of jealousy, whereby if a woman is suspected of adultery, she is brought before the sanctuary and must drink these bitter waters that, if she is guilty, will bring a curse upon her. This seems very strange to us, but what is interesting is that there is a presumption of innocence here. So the suspicious husband is not allowed just to take the law into his own hands, but in many ways, the Lord himself is able to determine whether or not she is guilty, and the punishment will be enacted only if the woman is truly guilty. So once again, we see great concern for the purity of the camp. Then we have the Nazirite vow, which is really a precursor to monastic vows in Christianity. And this is the idea that a person who wants to consecrate himself to God must make this threefold vow of not drinking wine, not cutting his hair, and not approaching a dead body. In other words, avoiding completely ritual impurity for the sake of consecrating himself to the Lord. This would have been typically a temporary vow, and it offered an opportunity for a man to dedicate himself in a particular way to the Lord. At the end of chapter 6, we have the famous blessing of Aaron. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And this would have been the high priestly blessing upon all the people, in this case in preparation for their departure from Mount Sinai. Chapter 7 is the longest chapter in the Pentateuch, and we are told that all the tribal leaders come before the sanctuary and bring their offerings, one per day, beginning with Judah, and we're told about a great number of offerings here as a form of, once again, dedication before the Lord. The priests are then instructed on how to light the menorah, the Levites are further consecrated, and then significantly they celebrate the Passover. We know that the Exodus began with the Passover in Exodus chapter 12 and 13, and now we see this Passover as a type of final ritual celebration just before their departure from Mount Sinai. We are told again about the cloud, the pillar of cloud that would lead them through the wilderness, and then the silver trumpets in chapter 10. The silver trumpets that are for the sake of summoning the assembly for specifically solemn moments, festivals, situations of war, and also for the camp to set out and continue their travels. And this occurs in chapter 10, verse 11. It is the call to depart from Sinai. It's the 20th day of the second month of the second year. And so they have spent 11 months at Mount Sinai, where God has revealed himself to them, adopted his people, made a covenant with them, prepared them, given them his legislation, and now they are ready to go. So we get a sense of great order and preparation in these initial 10 chapters of Numbers. It seems very much a type of military order where the people are indeed getting ready for their journeys through the wilderness to take the land that God has promised them. As we said, this is going to take a little longer than planned. We are in the middle section of the book of Numbers, chapters 11 to 21. What's going to happen here? The failure of the first generation with some grumbling in the wilderness and unbelief at Kadesh Barnea with the episode of the spies. Then the 38 years go by very quickly for us, the readers, not for the Israelites. As we said, within just a few chapters, we move from the first to the second generation. This is going to include legislation, another rebellion from Korah and his gang, then Levite responsibilities, and the strange red heifer ritual and water of cleansing. Then chapters 20-21, we are in the second generation, which also has a series of failures, including the mysterious sin of Moses and Aaron, which is going to lead to the death of both before the Israelites enter the promised land. Edom refuses passage to Israel, the death of Aaron, the fiery snake, and victories over the Transjordan kingdoms. So that's the middle part of Numbers. Grumbling in the wilderness. Off we go with Israel's departure. On the 20th day of the second month in the second year, the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony. And the children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai on their journeys. Then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran, so they started out for the first time according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. This, my friends, is a momentous moment, the great departure from Mount Sinai. Unfortunately, it does not last very long until there are already some complaints and fire comes down from the Lord and consumes some of them. And so we can see that this does not set a very positive tone for these wanderings through the wilderness. Just a few verses later, the Israelites are craving for meat. They complain about the manna. They're already tired of eating this bread from heaven. Moses expresses despair in the people's unbelief, and this is going to lead him to choose 70 elders who are going to help him legislate and guide and educate between the people. God's response to the people is followed by God's Spirit falling upon the elders. And we are told about these two men, Eldad and Medad, who prophesy in the camp, and the Lord sends quails and a plague upon the people. So be careful what you pray for, because often you will get what you ask for. And here we see these complaints about the manna. God will provide indeed meat, but this is going to be followed with a plague. And the Lord is very displeased with his people because of their lack of faith already at the beginning of their journey. In chapter 12, we see Miriam and Aaron who oppose Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. So it's not clear exactly what the problem is, or who is this Cushite woman, whether this is Zipporah, Moses' wife that we encountered and met in the book of Exodus, or if he had another wife. And so it's not entirely clear, but these accusations led to the contrast between the arrogance of Zipporah and Aaron in contrast to Moses, who is called here very meek, more than all men that were on the face of the earth. And so here we see a key for the character that God desires. This is going to lead to a judgment specifically on Miriam, who becomes leprous. And leprosy we know is akin to death. And in Jewish tradition, leprosy is often associated with slander. And because Miriam slandered, we see this judgment fall upon her. Moses intercedes for Miriam, and she is quarantined for 7 days and will be healed. What do we see following this? Chapter 11 is time for us to review our triangle. And so how does Israel function here in the wilderness? Well, we see that God speaks to his people through the Torah, which is the revelation of God's prophetic word of truth. We see the priestly and sacrificial liturgy in the tabernacle, and this is going to convey God's life. It's going to protect the Israelites from the judgment of death because of their sins. And then we also see the judges and or elders who help Moses to legislate the people, and they teach Israel the way in which they are to live. So we see once again in this Sinai covenant a partial restoration of the truth, the life, and the way through the threefold office of priest, prophet, and king. Also, the people of God at the time of the Exodus, what did they look like? We know that the people of God were one, united by their faith, their worship, and by the common rule of the living of the Torah. As we see in Exodus 24, verse 3, all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said, we will do. The people of God are also called to be holy. As we saw in Leviticus, consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. The people of God are also called to be a witness to all nations. Exodus 34, before all your people I will do marvels such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation, and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord. Finally, the unity of the faith of the people of God is preserved by the genealogical lineage of Aaron's sons, and you shall gird them with sashes, Aaron and his sons. The priesthood shall be theirs for a perpetual statute. What do we see in these four characteristics of the people of God? You may recognize something we know from the Nicene Creeds. I believe in one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. And you can see the formation of the people of God here already at the time of the Exodus. They are called to be one holy, somehow not just closed in on themselves, but they're called to be a witness to all nations, which anticipates a certain Catholicity. And the genealogical lineage of Aaron's sons points to what we will know later as apostolic succession, this idea that the divine authority that God has appointed will be passed on from father to son or from successor to successor. So as we can see here, the characteristics of the people of God already anticipate the four marks of the church that will be revealed much later. It's time to send spies to Canaan. This is the famous episode of unbelief at Kadesh Barnea. Moses sends 12 spies to the land of Canaan. As it turns out, the land is quite extraordinary. We're told about the journey of the spies in chapter 13, but they return with a negative report. They say that the land indeed flows with milk and honey, but there are giants there that are very threatening, and maybe it's not such a good idea to take this land. Here is their report in Numbers 13, verses 27 to 32. We went to the land where he sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. Wow, God has taken them this far, and the land is truly a bountiful and prosperous land, but they get cold feet, and only Caleb and Joshua encourage the people to take the land. So the people's unbelief and rebellion is going to have long-lasting consequences. And so what's going to happen here? Moses intercedes for them. It's almost a repeat of the episode of the golden calf and their unfaithfulness and lack of trust in God's promises. Thanks to Moses' intercession, the Lord will extend his pardon, but also his judgment, so that the people will be condemned to wander for 40 years and die in the wilderness. Once this verdict is decreed, the people quickly change their mind and they say, well, no, maybe we will try and conquer the land now. And so they go and attempt a first conquest, but this results in a crushing defeat for them. So we see that the die have been cast and they will not enter the land at this point. So what an extraordinary dynamic here in this episode of The Spies. We see something that is deeply ingrained in human nature, this desire even to return to Egypt, this desire to prefer safety over seizing God's promises for us. It's as if the people are telling Moses and God, just keep us safe even if we have to sell ourselves back into slavery. Isn't that an extraordinary dynamic that we need to look into our own hearts, whether we are sometimes prone to that? This fear, this cowardice, and this desire to go back to slavery as long as we're kept safe. Who needs to wander through the wilderness, even if there is this faint hope that God has good things for us in the end? So here is the map of the sending of the spies to Canaan. As we can see, it's not really all that far. Kadesh Barnea is already right on the border to the promised land. And we know that following this incident, they will turn back and become lost essentially for the next 38 and a half years. In chapter 15, we are given some more legislation with laws regarding the offerings and the execution of a Sabbath violator. Recall that the Sabbath is not just the sign of God's covenant with Israel, but it's the sign of God's covenant with creation, going back to Genesis 2. We are told about the tzitzit in Hebrew, the tassels that are to remind the people of God's commandments. And here it is from Numbers 15, verses 38 to 40. Speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And you shall have the tassel that you may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined, and that you may remember and do all my commandments and be holy for your God. So a reminder of Israel's call to be holy just as the Lord is holy, and those tassels will be a reminder to them for future generations. We are in Numbers 16. It's the time of Korah's rebellion. So we're introduced to this Korah, who is a Levite, along with Datan, Abiram, On, and 250 men who rise up against Moses and Aaron. So they gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" You might say that this is a type of first anti-clerical rebellion here. So Korah and his people rise up against the priesthood and say, "We do not need a special priesthood. All of us are holy, and therefore all of us should be priests." So they question the authority of Moses and Aaron and this distinction between clergy and laity. Moses responds, and the people even speak of Egypt as a land flowing with milk and honey. So once again, we see this defeatism and this desire to return to Egypt. This is going to lead to a test. They are to offer incense in the tent of meeting to see who actually are the priests who are anointed by the Lord. And this does not end well for them. The ground opens up and swallows them, while fire consumes the other 250. So a good lesson to avoid these type of anti-clerical rebellions and to respect the structures of authority that the Lord sets up. This is followed by murmuring, another plague, more intercession that's going to save the day. And in chapter 17, we see that it must be clarified who are the legitimate priests. And so every tribe is to bring their staff before the tabernacle, and we're going to see Aaron's staff that will bud as a sign that to him and his sons have been entrusted the priesthood. Then we have some more provisions for the priests and Levites, and here we have this strange ritual of the red heifer, which is set up for the sake of purifying the entire people. It's a type of ritual that is to atone for the sin of the golden calf, and also presumably for this anti-clerical rebellion of Korah and his men. It's time to follow the wanderings of the second generation, going from Kadesh to Mount Hor. All of a sudden, it is 38 years later. Miriam dies in Kadesh, and so there's the end of Moses' sister. It's the second episode of the flowing of water from the rock. We already saw the first episode in the book of Exodus, so once again, you can see some parallels between Numbers and Exodus. And because of this incident, Moses is going to be banned from entering the promised land. It's not entirely clear what was his infraction. We know that God asked Moses to speak to the rock. Moses struck the rock twice. It seems like he lost his patience, became angry at the people, and so this is going to have consequences for Moses to his great distress. Edom denies Israel passage, and then Aaron also dies on Mount Hor, and Aaron's son Eleazar will be his successor and the next high priest in Israel. So we can see the first generation definitely dying out with the end and passing of Miriam and Aaron. From Mount Hor to Moab, the Israelites win a victory over the Canaanites in Arad, which is in the south of Israel today. Then we have the episode of the fiery serpents and the bronze serpent that works as an antidote. We know that the people complain again. God sends fiery serpents against them. Moses intercedes, but they are bitten and begin to die. So Moses, at the command of God, makes a bronze serpent, and those who look at it are saved. So it's a very strange narrative, and we know that this will become very important in the New Testament. The Gospel of John refers to this episode of the serpent in the wilderness, saying that just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So this idea of the serpent, which in many ways is a symbol of sin, we know that the serpents become a source of death, but then by making this bronze serpent and elevating it, it's as if the cause of death becomes the source of life. And we see something similar with the cross of Christ, so that sin and death, which the Son of God takes upon himself, become a source of life. The Israelites then journey to Moab. They win an important victory against Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and then against Og, the king of Bashan. These are really the first fruits of the conquest of Canaan. They are still on the eastern side of the Jordan, so not properly part of the land of Canaan, but this is going to give the Israelites some confidence that they are actually able to take the land following their various defeats. Second generation in the plains of Moab. We are in Numbers chapter 22, and here we're going to see this threat from Moab. First, an external threat with the Balaam story, and then an internal threat when the Israelites commit sin with the Moabite women in Baal Peor. Then we have a census of the second generation, and then beginning in chapter 27, we see a review of their journey and preparation for possession of the land. So we will walk through these various preparations fairly quickly. The Israelites arrive in the plains of Moab, and this is where they will remain through the rest of the book and through the entire book of Deuteronomy. We are introduced to Balak, this king of Moab, who calls the prophet Balaam to curse Israel. This is the famous episode of the talking donkey. At first, Balaam refuses, then he is prompted by God himself to do as Balak requests, and on his journey, an angel appears and stops the donkey. Balaam loses his cool, and we hear this donkey beginning to talk to Balaam. So obviously the Lord is at work here in this really interesting narrative. Balaam is ordered to curse Israel, but every time he is somehow guided mysteriously so that he is unable to curse Israel, but blesses them each time. So we can see this fairly detailed account of Balaam's various oracles that are actually going to recapitulate God's promises to Abraham. Every time Balaam is ordered to build 7 altars, they offer bulls and rams every time. And the first oracle, Balaam says, "Who can count the dust of Jacob?" pointing to the promise to make Abraham a great nation as the dust of the earth. Every time the king Balak is very angry, "Listen, I did not call you to bless this people. You're supposed to curse them for me." And we know the power of words in the ancient Near East was considered to be very significant. The second oracle in chapter 23, again, building of 7 altars, offering bulls and rams on each one. And then Balaam says, "The shout of a king is among this people," pointing to the promise of a great name, the second divine promise to Abraham. "I will make of you a great name," pointing to the rise of royalty. Now he says the shout of a king is among them. Balak again is very angry. This leads to this third oracle. Once again, they build 7 altars, offer bulls and rams. And here we have some imagery of the Garden of Eden, and Balaam says, "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you." You're going to recognize the Abrahamic blessing from Genesis chapter 12. So it points to Abraham's worldwide blessing, that Abraham would become a blessing to all nations. And so here we have this pagan prophet who confirms these divine promises to Abraham, pointing to the fact that they are really unstoppable. Even when a pagan king summons a pagan prophet to curse the people, we see that God even guides the mouth of the Moabite prophet. As a bonus, Balaam offers a last oracle. This one is uncalled for. And what does he say? I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. Out of Jacob one shall have dominion and destroy the remains of the city. Somewhat cryptic and obscure, but also very interesting, this idea of a star coming out of Jacob and a scepter, again pointing to kingship, rising out of Israel, someone who will have dominion and destroy the remains of the city. What is very interesting is that the Aramaic Targums, the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, going way back to the first centuries of the Christian era, this is how they paraphrase this verse from Numbers. Here's the Targum Onkelos. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but he is not near. When a king shall arise out of Jacob and be anointed, the Messiah out of Israel, he will slay the princes of Moab and reign over all the children of men. And here's another Targum, the Targum Jonathan. But when a mighty king of the house of Jacob shall reign and shall be anointed Messiah, wielding the mighty scepter of Israel, he will slay the princes of Moab. So as you can see, both Targums here read this prophecy from Balaam's last oracle as very much a messianic prophecy, pointing to the future king who will come and reign not just over Israel, but over other nations as well. But doesn't all this sound like mythology, this story of the Moabite prophet who tries to curse Israel and just ends up blessing them? Surely this is a fictitious character, isn't it? Well, it's interesting that we have found an inscription in Jordan in the place called Deir Allah in 1967, and this inscription is dated to approximately the 800s or so BC, and what does it say? This inscription says, "The sayings of Balaam, son of Beor, the man who was seer of the gods. Lo, gods came to him in the night and spoke to him according to these words." And the rest of the message is somewhat secondary, but why is this inscription important? It confirms the existence of indeed a Moabite prophet, because whereas Deir Allah in Jordan, this is exactly Moabite territory. And so this inscription confirms that there was indeed a prophet who was known in Moab, who was considered to be a seer of the gods. Unfortunately, what Balaam could not do, trying to threaten Israel externally, the Israelites do upon themselves. And so here they are, still in the same place, a place called Shittim or Baal Peor, and they commit harlotry with the women of Moab. And later we are told that this was due to Balaam's counsel. So Balaam is not necessarily a good guy here in this story. This is going to lead to a plague upon the Israelites. We see Aaron's grandson, Phinehas or Pinchas, the priest who slays one of the idolaters along with his Midianite girlfriend and stops the plague after 24,000 Israelites die. And this is going to lead God to give Phinehas the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. So we can see that whereas Balaam failed to curse the Israelites, in many ways they cursed themselves by engaging in idolatry and harlotry with these women of Moab. So this is going to lead to a judgment on the Midianites, who are also part of this apostasy. We come near the end of the book of Numbers. In chapter 26, we are given now a census of the second generation. We have the daughters of a certain man called Zelophehad, who are concerned about passing on the inheritance of their fathers, and so they bring their concern to Moses. And then God says that he will show Moses the land, even though Moses will not be able to enter the land of Canaan. This is the time when God appoints Joshua as successor to Moses, so we can see that they are beginning to prepare for life after Moses. Chapter 28 seems a little bit out of place. It seems to be taken straight out of Leviticus. We are told about the Tamid, the daily offerings, and the whole chapter is dedicated to sacrifices, namely the public sacrifices. Leviticus really focused on the private sacrifices in the first 7 chapters of Leviticus, and now we are told about the public sacrifices that the priest should offer in the tabernacle and future temple. So Sabbath offerings for the new moon or new month, and the yearly festivals of Passover, Feast of Weeks, Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Feast of Tabernacles, with some regulations for vows and oaths as well. Preparations for entering the land. We are told in chapter 31 that the Israelites wage war against the Midianites, And then we are introduced to the Transjordan tribes, namely Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. They like very much the land here to the east of the Jordan, and they asked Moses if they could possess this land. And after some negotiation, Moses says, well, you need to participate in the conquest of the whole land along with the other tribes, but once the conquest is completed, yes, you can possess this land east of the Jordan. Chapter 33 gives us the itinerary or the stops in Israel's journey, and we are told about the instructions to drive out the Canaanites. We know the Canaanites morally were very corrupt and degenerate, and they will be a thorn in the flesh of the Israelites. They will constantly lead them astray from God's covenant, and so this is why they are commanded to drive them out. Here we see the journey from Kadesh Barnea to the plains of Moab. We don't know exactly where they went throughout these 38 and a half years, but they end up right over here in the plains of Moab, right across from Jericho, just a little bit north of the Dead Sea. Here also some various suggestions as to the route of the Exodus. Once again, all this is quite speculative, but we know that they ended right around here across from Jericho. In chapter 34, we are told about the borders of the land. Later, we're going to see the prophet Ezekiel also giving some borders of the land that are quite similar, but not exactly identical. And then we are given the list of the tribal leaders who will be in charge of allocating the land. So as you can see, everything in these final chapters of the book of Numbers is directed towards the conquest and possession of the land of Canaan. We are also told that there will be 48 cities designated for the Levites. We know that the Levites are not given any tribal territory. So here you can see on the map all these various cities in green that will be given to the Levites. And of these cities, 6 cities will be cities of refuge for anyone who unintentionally kills another and can escape basically family vengeance. So the avenger of blood, they can flee to one of these 3 cities here on the east of the Jordan or another 3 cities on the west of the Jordan. And the book concludes once again with the daughters of Zelophehad, who express concern that the women must marry within the tribe of their father so that no inheritance is lost from their tribe and passes on to another tribe. Okay, so this concludes our overview of the book of Numbers, a book with a lot of action, a lot of lessons to be learned from Israel's disbelief and their temptation to give up on God's promises, and the call for courage, for tenacity, for endurance, and for faith, and to resist this temptation to always want to go back to Egypt, selling away their freedom for the sake of safety. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time as we continue our study of Israel in the wilderness with the book of Deuteronomy.